So with that, let me start with Paul Kendrick, who's going to be the first introducer. First candidate introducing himself.
Hello? Hello? Don't start with that. Hello? Hello? All right. Good evening. Thank you so much to the neighborhood associations for hosting this tonight. My name is Paul Kendrick. I am a proud girl dad, and I want to earn your vote. I got to serve in President Obama's White House and learn how to get things done in government at the highest level, which equips me to be ready on day one to deliver things for us. After that, I got to serve on Governor Pritzker's campaign, and I'm most proud of the work that I've been doing in community ever since. In building our Indivisible chapter in this neighborhood, which started at the Women's March meeting some of the people that were forming it, and over 8 years, we've gone from a handful of people to thousands that have really stood up to defend our city and say, hands off Chicago, connecting people to civic action. But as I listen in community, and I think about this seat, there's so many worries that I hear right now. And I hear people saying, you know, I used to love to walk in the city at night and I'm afraid to. I hear people saying, I'm gonna have to leave the city I love because of these property tax bills. Or I'm worried about the future my grandkids are gonna have, or I just don't feel in control of my life right now. And I think to get that back, we need Chicago to nail the basics. And to me, that starts with safety. I have a two-pronged approach to both work on the root causes, but I'm willing to stand up to some in my party that don't want to admit that there are some loopholes and revolving doors that we gotta close. And we have to cap the sharp rise of these property taxes and work on the cost that people have. And we need fiscal responsibility while driving also excellence in our schools. As someone with that experience from making policy to bringing people together and actually having made change in this community, I will be the best partner to you in how we work as a team, because that's when we get the most done for our community. Hope to have your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Next speaker, 2 minutes, Kareem Lakhani.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? My name is Kareem Lakhani. I'm a father, a small business owner, an attorney, and a proud son of immigrants. My parents came here in the 1970s undocumented. They had no money, no education, they didn't speak English. But they came here for an opportunity to build a better life. I grew up understanding how fragile our rights are, and also what's possible here in America. When I got in this race 7 months ago, it was with a clear purpose. I'm running to protect the promise of opportunity that brought my parents here. Because that promise is under threat by rising costs, housing pressures, and by Donald Trump and his MAGA allies that are terrorizing our cities, targeting our immigrant communities, killing people in the streets, and tearing apart hardworking American families. I'm running for state representative because this district is my home. I was born in this district at St. Joseph's. I've lived here for 12 years. My wife and I are raising our 2-year-old son here in this district. I've spent my career helping to operate and grow my family's hospitality company. I've managed budgets, I've met payroll, I've created hundreds of good paying jobs, and I led our company through a pandemic which nearly decimated our industry. I'm so incredibly proud to have the support of my employees. Teamsters Local 727 is a union that represents them. They endorse me in this race because they know I always show up for those who depend on me. I'm also incredibly proud to have the support of the SEIU, the Secretary of State, and groups like ICE and Personal PAC who are on the front lines fighting for immigrant rights and access to abortion. In Springfield, I'm going to fight for lower costs, for safer, more stable neighborhoods, and to protect our fundamental freedoms. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Litzy Kurinchenko.
You got it right.
Kurinchenko, 2 minutes.
Okay, sorry. Can you hear me? Okay. Hi, everyone. I am Litzy Kurishinkel. I'm an immigrant who came to the US 15 years ago with a 1-year-old baby on my left hip and a suitcase in my right hand. Today, Chicago is my forever home. I am running for office because I feel daily life priorities of ordinary people are not being heard in Springfield. We all know it. Our property taxes have been climbing year after year without any relief. As a former local school council chair, I have seen how school resources are so limited despite our property taxes paying for public school funding. Again, we've all been there: garage theft, mail theft, bikes being stolen. As a mom of two girls, I worry when my teenager takes that bus from her school until she reaches home. We've also heard from our young families and young adults. They have lost hope in buying their own home. And seniors are being pushed out of our district. This needs to change. Here is my plan. One, let's fix our public school funding, reduce over reliance on property taxes. Two, let's restore public safety for good. Let's prevent repeated crimes through structured pathways that will actually stop reoffending. Let us bring back that American dream for our young adults, and let's give them support system to buy their home. My campaign is focused on daily life priorities of ordinary people. I am powered by small donors, neighbors, parents, renters, not power brokers or political insiders. I am Litsi Kurshingal. I am honored to seek your vote today. Thank you. Oh, you have it.
Thank you. Mayor LeBuhn, 2 minutes.
Thank you. And thank you all for those who organized tonight's event. Thank you to everyone for coming out tonight in the cold weather that we've got. And thank you to the Old Town Arts Center for hosting us. My wife and I, we live right on Willow and Larrabee, so we're just a couple blocks over where we're raising our 2 young kids, and so it wasn't too far of a walk. Let me start by telling you guys a little bit about myself. I started my career as a 4th grade teacher out in California, and I loved teaching. But I quickly saw a lot of the ways in which my students were being affected by things that were happening outside the classroom. Housing instability, a lack of economic opportunity, a broken immigration system. And so I wanted to get involved in trying to address some of the things that I couldn't control inside the classroom. I wanted to go into government. So I moved back to Chicago, went to Northwestern for law school, and after graduating, I joined Mayor Lightfoot's campaign. She won, went in with her to City Hall, and worked on all the same issues that I saw affecting my students up close. Improving access to housing, promoting economic development, standing up to ICE and Border Patrol during Trump's first term. That was an amazing experience, and I was so glad to have it. Today, I'm an attorney in private practice. I'm a partner at Bartlett Beck. I teach legal ethics at Northwestern. Outside of work, my wife and I are kept busy by our 2 young kids, and perhaps most importantly, I'm the commissioner of our kids' toddler T-ball league. I love our district. I love our neighborhood. I am so proud to raise my kids here, but we face some real challenges too. Our housing prices are sky high. We continue to have schools that aren't always as focused as they should be on student achievement, and these are things that we need to fix. Everyone up here agrees that these are key issues, but I've worked on these issues throughout my career, and if elected as state representative, I'll be ready to tackle these issues on day one. For that reason, I ask for your vote. Thanks so much.
Thank you. All right, first question. You've given us sort of an overview. You have a sense, we now have a sense of why you're running. I'd like you to focus on the first year. What specific initiative will you pursue the first year? And do you expect it's going to have opposition? Or what strategies will you use to pass and move forward on your initiative? Let's start with Karim.
So year one, I'm going to focus on a few things. One, I hear about affordability across the district. And I think there's a few critical things we need to do to tackle affordability. The first is reforming our tax code. We need a tax code that reflects our values, which means that we need to make sure billionaires are paying their fair share. We need to move from a flat tax to a progressive tax. And we need to be able to fund critical things like education, not from increasing property taxes, but from state funds, so that we don't feel that pressure at a local level. We also need to grow our economy and grow our tax base. I know what businesses are going through. It's incredibly tough to grow and build a business here in Chicago. I've done it. And I think there's so much more we can do to streamline permitting, to provide technical assistance, access to capital, and make sure that we can create good paying jobs here in Chicago. The other thing that we need to tackle in year one, and hopefully they'll do it in this legislative session, is more to take on Trump and to protect our immigrant neighbors. I'm so proud of our city, the way that we've stood up and come together. I'm so proud of these rapid response folks, everyday people who have gone out with whistles, recorded, done school patrols, done so much to try to protect people. But there's more we can do from the state level. There's more we can do to educate people and immigrants about what their rights are. There's so much more we can do to provide legal services to those that are detained. We can work with community groups and make sure that people get access to emergency response if a family member is taken. I think there's so much more we can do to make sure that everyone here is welcome and safe.
I will be focusing on fixing public school funding and reducing over-reliance on property taxes. Why do I do that? I'm a parent who's invested in public schools. I'm also a homeowner. If you look at the property taxes we pay, a huge share of it is invested in our public school funding. But as a former local school council chair who has overseen school budgets, I have seen how limited school resources are. And we as parents rely on private fundraising to fill the gap. Just down the block, there are other schools which do not have that kind of access. And even the educational outcomes, there is such a huge disparity across the state. So my solution is this. One, let us shift the source of public school funding towards the state. Let the state take the major share of public school funding. Reduce the onus and the burden on homeowners. It is not a fair system at this time, and it is not giving us equitable educational outcomes. Again, there are about 852 school districts across Illinois. We are paying for duplicative systems, HR, payroll, IT. We need to consolidate them and free up that funds and reinvest in our public education, which will also impact in reducing our property taxes. Mind you, let me be very clear. I'm not talking about shutting the schools down. I believe in keeping our local autonomy. Classrooms stay local. Funding goes to the state. Now, I'm not sharing any revolutionary idea here. Massachusetts has been doing this for decades, and we know what a successful educational outcomes they have. It is time that Illinois focuses on real educational outcomes for our children. Reduce over-reliance on property taxes. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
So if I had to focus on one initiative that I'm going to pursue in my first year, my focus would be on passing something that's known as a shot clock rule. Other states have this rule in place, and it provides that when a local municipality receives a permit to build housing, they have to make a decision on it within 30 to 60 days. And if they don't, it's deemed approved. Right now, we don't have any rule like that in Illinois. It takes between 12 and 14 weeks to get a decision in the city of Chicago on many building permits. And there's no benefit to us for having a system like that in place. In fact, what it does is raise soft costs for housing development. During that time, developers have to pay their lawyers, they have to pay for financing, and it raises costs for all of us without any corresponding public benefit. If we were able to increase the time in which our housing permit applications were being reviewed and processed, we'd be able to bring down those soft costs, make it easier to build more housing, and bring down the cost for renters and the homeowners that ultimately buy those homes. I think that's something that could work on day one, and the thing that's great about it is it's not going to cost the state any money. This is something that we can do to pick up the pace in our local municipalities to address what is obviously a crisis here in the 12th district and across the state.
Yes. Hello. There, Gaming?
Can you press the button?
Oh. So for me, it starts with safety. I want to pass a chronic retail theft bill. And as I told you, my approach to safety is two-pronged. We both have to work on issues of homelessness, mental health, the flow of illegal guns into our city, poverty. But we also, and I think I'm the only one in this race that's really talking about this, have some key loopholes that we need to close. I think a state's attorney should be able to bring to a judge a premeditated criminal ring that is just killing our small businesses, that is demoralizing our police officers, that are exploiting loopholes with chronic retail theft, which is where we see numbers way up, and it leads to the smash and grabs. It's making us all less safe. So closing some of those issues is absolutely paramount for our safety in the city. With property taxes, I want to pass a cap on the year-to-year growth, but also look at how we make the senior freeze more generous and a better homestead exemption in Illinois that, you know, other states are just not having the kinds of egregious bills that we're getting. So I think we need to move a property tax package. I want to ban cell phone use during instructional time in schools. This is what we did at Lincoln Park High School, where I'm on the local school council. Quickest way to stronger educational outcomes. Everyone's happy with it. Kids even admit I focus better. But overall, you know, in education funding, I always want to focus on how we're driving outcomes. I want to be, and maybe this will be a longer conversation, but be working on the groundwork for a grand bargain on our pensions, where we need to be on a stronger fiscal roadmap as a state. And I'm willing to take on that third rail. And against ICE, we need more criminal and civil accountability of these lawless, masked thug officers. And we need to protect places like public parks that we have not done yet. And ultimately be able to say that we are doing everything possible to push the envelope and say, if you come here and hurt people, we're going to arrest you.
Okay, so I asked for one. We got many more ideas than one, but I'm not going to let you off the hook that easily. So now I want you to focus on one of your ideas and tell, because they were all big ideas. I recognize them. I know these ideas. Tell us, are you going to have opposition? And if you are, what are your strategies for overcoming the opposition? How are you going to pass your bill? Let's start with Lindsay.
Yours
were the biggest ideas, Lindsay, just say it.
Just to say it? Okay.
No, you can't hold it.
Okay. You're not starting the timer, right? Okay.
I'm sorry. Just a little bit longer.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Yes, it's definitely a lofty idea because we are trying to fix public school funding, which may not be a popular or politically convenient decision, but I'm not running to make populist decisions. I am running to make long-term benefits for our district and for our state. We have been talking about property taxes and education for decades and decades. And many problems don't get solved because there are political insiders and special interests that benefit from taking convenient decisions. I am not running to do that. So it will be really difficult to when we talk about consolidating school districts across the Illinois, there may be some heartbreaks for sure. But when you are sinking in the sea, what do? As a mom who takes care of family budgets, I am used to looking at the bills and deciding, hey, which one should get paid first and which one should wait. This is the same thing. There will be many stakeholders here, educational leaders, unions, political leaders who may be slightly uncomfortable about consolidation of school districts. But that's why negotiation and trying to find a common ground matters. So I have done this before. I have, coming from a coastal region, our village was sinking, and I had to negotiate with people with opposing ideologies and multiple stakeholders, work with national leaders and local leaders, and come to an agreement because it is in our interest that property taxes get reduced, and it is in our interest that we have good educational outcomes for our children. Education is a core for our future. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
So the question was, what was one policy initiative we'd pursue in our first year, right?
And the opposition.
And the opposition,
You're
yeah.
going to encounter, and what's your strategy for dealing with that?
So I will say, as a first-year legislator going down to the General Assembly, I'm not going to promise that I'm going to be able to reform our entire school funding system or take on the pension crisis in my first year. I think realistically, we can make progress on some of the challenges that we face. And so, in proposing something like shot clock legislation, that's something that I think is realistic for a legislator to pursue in the first year. And for me, this reflects an experience in government. What is it that you're going to be able to do coming into this job in the first year? As someone who, will be in my first year in the General Assembly, I think that's something that can be realistically pursued, something that we'd be able to do, and that I can come back to this group a year from now and talk about the progress that we've made. What sort of opposition will there be? I don't know that municipalities would love the idea of having the state tell them, we got to pick up the pace. You've got to make these decisions in, a month or 2 months rather than waiting 4 or 5. But that's how it goes. And that's one of the things that's important about being a legislator is providing oversight to whether it's the school districts or the municipalities to make sure that we are in the business of service delivery and doing a good job by our residents. And so with something like this, we can realistically commit that as state leaders, we're going to provide our municipalities with an expectation that when you get a building permit, you've got to turn it around quickly. We're not going to drive up housing costs by sitting around and waiting for 4 months before we get a decision. So I do think there'd be some opposition. I think it's something that's readily addressed because I think across the state, we recognize that this is a challenge and it's something that we need to fix.
Hello. Sorry, I'm gonna do this every single time. I'm really good at building coalitions. When I say that, people can throw around words like change, I'm really proud that I've made change in this neighborhood when it comes to things like building our indivisible chapter. And just a few days ago, we moved Senator Duckworth to a no on that DHS funding because when you build power as neighbors together, we're able to raise the saliency of issues and we're able to make our voice heard. I'm really good at that. In Washington, D.C., I led the coalition to pass the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act to create more opportunity for young people in America. And so ultimately, I do that through listening and hearing other people's perspectives and their goals and finding that common ground. So with something like the chronic retail theft bill and some of the changes that we need to make, I think there's a few other pieces too that I think we can really get a good coalition around. For instance, the barrier right now is too high on stalking, on like stalkers to be detained. They're too high. Another loophole, misdemeanor battery. We're not allowed to look at a history of violence for someone and then they can be let out. So we need judges to be able to see what is the threat to the public. And I think we can build a coalition when we also say, for those that maybe, criminal justice reform, very important to them. I think it gets set back when we have things like what happened on the CTA of someone who's been arrested 70 times, attacking someone. That sets the cause back when we're not thoughtful and we don't look at the consequences of our legislation. So I think that's a good cleanup that is going to make us safer. Again, that comes out of my listening to aldermen, to what's happening in Clark Division, to listening to our police officers, to listening to business owners. That is a very practical cleanup to make us safer. And I'm all about learning from people in different communities of, hey, what's going on in East St. Louis? What's going on in Collars? What's going on in Carbondale? Let's find alignment on things that make us all safer.
Taking on affordability while trying to transform our tax code is not a small task. And I can understand that. But when we talk about economic development and taking on billionaires in this state, we often get lost in a conversation. It's either we need to protect businesses, we can't scare people away, or we need to support workers. And I spent my career doing both. I operate a business, very proudly make a profit from that business, but also take care of my workers. And that's why my employees have endorsed me. We give generous raises, we give free healthcare, we give good benefits, we take care of them, and we help run an operation. And so changing our tax code to make sure that billionaires pay their fair share is such an essential thing to be able to help fund education, to be able to help fund all those essential services that we have in the state without relying on property taxes, without relying on regressive sales increases that impact day-to-day people. The opposition is pretty clear. It's billionaires who don't want to pay more in taxes, which Too bad, we need to take them on. The issue is that they fund campaigns, whether they fund general campaigns, whether they fund Republicans, whether they fund moderate Democrats. They find ways to invest a ton of money to avoid seeing progress on tax reform. And we saw it with Ken Griffin a few years ago. He said, hey, if you pass a graduated income tax, I'm gonna leave. We did pass a graduated income tax and he still left. Not before he spent over $100 million making sure that it didn't pass. But we're in a different place now, and it's incredibly important that we pass tax reform and we make sure that billionaires pay their fair share here in Illinois.
Thank you. Okay, so you must be aware of the federal budget cuts that will have impact for our constituents here and Illinois residents. What budget cuts will you be really concerned about, and what budget issue will you pursue? Let's start this one with Matt.
So I think in terms of the budget issue I'm most worried about, I would be worried about our public school funding. I've got 2 kids under 5. We're sending them both to CPS. My daughter's 4.5 right now, and so she'll be starting kindergarten next year. And I want to make sure that as we look ahead to north of $2 billion a year deficits in Illinois, which is what's forecast by 2030, we're not balancing our budgets on the backs of our public schools. We need to do everything we can to continue to provide great public education for our kids. And so we need to think about what are the things that we can do to address what is a very real budget challenge. The Republican tax bill that was passed last year has marked significant cuts for money that was going to the states, especially in the form of Medicaid. And so we all need to come together to think about what we can do. Usually this conversation is about how to raise revenue or how to cut services. But I do think there's a third option that is not discussed as much as it should, and that's economic growth. If I'm elected as a state representative, I'm going to be laser focused on trying to grow Illinois' economy. If we have more people here, we're going to grow our tax base, we're going to raise tax revenues, and our property tax burden is going to be spread out among more people that are living here. To do that, we can do things like make it easier to build housing, get a lot more neighbors into Chicago to bear that tax burden, and we can do more to invest in the public spending that drives economic growth. Things like investments in higher education and funding investments in the industries of the future, like quantum. These are things that will make a big difference in balancing our budget and making sure that we continue to have money to invest in our public services going forward.
Thank you. Paul.
So, I worked for Arnie Duncan in the U.S. Department of Education before working for President Obama at the White House. And this is a very important moment to have someone who's had those kinds of experiences at the highest level of government to understand the ways in which things are being weaponized to ultimately hurt us in Illinois. And we're going to lose more than $40 billion in Medicaid funds over the next decade. Really let that sink in. So my top priority is making sure that you have the care that you need and that we continue bringing down the costs that aren't too high. Some of the ways that we can do this. So again, this is where having this federal government experience helps. They're trying to get all their cost savings by tripping you up on administrative burdens and paperwork. I have a lot of experience with how you look at what data that you already have in the government to keep people automatically enrolled so we don't have folks showing up at the hospital and you thought they were covered and then they're not. Another issue, they're trying to take away vaccine coverage for low-income children. We need to work with other states who share our values to make sure that children have the vaccines that they need, that we're guided by science. But we need to invest in some of our community health centers, and we need to make sure our hospitals stay open. And back to the education one, but I'll just add, Title I is something I'm really concerned about, where so much of our school funding, Trump has already tried to play with this. Again, having worked with the Department of Ed, I really want to make sure that we get the funding that we need. But I also have revenue ideas for Illinois. So for instance, we can have more creative use of some of our state assets to make up some of this revenue. For instance, we own lots of lands along all the highways of Illinois, and we could be doing clean energy generation, solar panels, wind, all along them, bringing in hundreds of millions of dollars into our budget. So I think we gotta be really creative because this is a time we have to understand the ways that we're being hurt and have the experience to really deliver for this community and how we do that.
We're facing a lot right now with budget cuts for the federal government, and I think healthcare is absolutely the number one issue here. I mean, Medicare, Medicaid, the health insurance that the most vulnerable communities here in Illinois rely on are at risk here. And so I think it's gonna be a tough move for us, but we're gonna have to find a way to support these communities. We're gonna have to find a way to provide bridge coverage and make sure that these communities aren't left behind. And you know, I know the governor is working on you know, pushing departments to put money aside to make sure that we were able to fund this. I think approaching different revenue streams as well to find a way to make sure that we don't leave any vulnerable communities behind.
Hi. So I am very concerned about funds being taken away from public education, just like Mac and Paul. But what I would like to focus on is a little different. As a person, as an immigrant who has worked internationally with multiple international institutions, I come with a fresh perspective here. Why are we always talking about budget cuts? Why can't we focus on expanding our revenue streams? We are Illinois, which is strategically located in the Midwestern part of our country. We have to reclaim our state as a logistical and transit hub, which means streamlining transit and making sure we have systems in place. Again, we have the world-class universities in the country or in the world. We are a hub with human capital. We are not utilizing it. Let us convert, human capital can be our economic engine. Encourage innovations, encourage entrepreneurship, and grow our tax base. So we have, again, going back to consolidation we have so many duplicative systems. We talk about pension, I hear about pensions all the time. We have 650 plus pension systems across Illinois, one of the most inefficient systems in the country. Look at our next door neighbor, Wisconsin. Centralized pension system, they pay the workers and they have 103% in funding. So we need to work on our competence. We need to work on exploit the potential we have in expanding our revenue streams. That way, we don't have to cut anything, but have enough revenues to take care of the basic necessities that we need to take care of. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. So back home in when you're not in Springfield, you're still state legislator. First of all, will this be a full-time job for you as a state legislator? And whether or not, it's not required to be a full-time job, but how will you make the office visible and accountable to the constituents of the district? Let's start with Paul.
Love that question. I'd probably do some consulting in education. I think we need stronger ethics on what some of these state legislators do when they're not in Springfield. I would do something with kids you know, I think my wife says that bring a little more income. So, but something very removed from state government, but just in education. I, you know, began my career helping more than 800 students get into it through college, and most recently worked on a program with 5 Southwest Side High School. So that's always my heart. I'd love to do probably something like that. But what I'd love to do is have advisory committees for this office with anyone who wants to be part of it. You want to be part of the Economic Growth and Development Committee, the Safety Committee, Education Committee? I want you as advisors. You know, I see this office as a partnership. It's not about me, it's about us. And I promise that, you know, we have some great elected officials in this district, but I'm going to compete to be the most responsive one. I give out my cell phone. Anyone can have my cell phone. My wife's going to kill me for saying this. Anyone in this room can have my cell phone, because I truly, truly am insatiably curious about your ideas, your experiences. And so I want to be the most responsive state representative, and I want you to be my advisor because I listen, I learn, and then I lead to make the change that we're seeking. So those are some of the ways, but people like to say, "Oh, you're everywhere." And that's me. I love this community. And so I'm going to continue being everywhere so that I can always be understanding what are some of the pain points. This is such a brilliant district. I mean, I truly every day knock down 10,000 doors. Every day I get a great idea from someone. So as your state representative, it's about being a vessel to advance those with the coalitions that make them happen. And if I get the honor of serving you, I want you on one of these committees to really use your expertise in how we advance good ideas.
If I have the honor to be elected your state representative, it will have 100% of my time, attention, and dedication. When I'm not in Springfield, I will be available to my family. We run a very small family operation. It's my parents, my sister, and me. And so, although I won't be there full time, I'd be happy to help them in any way I can. But I think it's going to be incredibly important to be here in the district to talk to voters. And I think what I've learned already in campaigning is just how important, impactful, and how inspirational it is to hear from people every single day. I mean, there's so many things you read in the news, so many issues that we're facing as a city, as a country, and every conversation I have with people just makes me feel so much more optimistic about what we're facing. So working with community groups, talking to voters, we've had a campaign office open on diversity. We've had lots of people come in and have conversations with us. That's what I'm also hoping to do, is have an open door, have people come in, have conversations. I think that's incredibly important.
One thing I've been missing in the past more than a decade since I've been living here is some platform where I could actually share my views to my elected officials. One thing that I would be focusing on would be organizing town hall meetings, regular town hall meetings, so that every resident in our district can come and share their opinions with the elected official if I have the honor to be your state representative. I will be holding listening sessions continuously, and there would be an online platform as well for people to share your thoughts and concerns. As I started in this campaign, one thing that I heard again and again from the political gurus is that youth, they're unreliable. There is no credibility. Don't focus on them. If you want to win, focus on this specific target population. I am honestly tired. I am sick and tired of the political playbook with which our elected officials and local political people play by. What I would focus on is we have 64% of our district are renters. Almost 50% are population between 18 to 35 years old. I will make sure I target different age groups and have listening sessions and town hall meetings with them to hear their voices. They are our future. So even if I'm not in Springfield, within the limited time I have here, I think it will keep us very, very busy. If you're really a grassroots level mobilizer, going to the people and listening to them and hearing them from where they are. I do not want to take a paternalistic leadership here. This is a collaborative leadership that will be born by the opinions and concerns of ordinary people. They don't need to have political insiders to get something done. Thank you.
I think for me to answer this question, I want to talk a little bit about how I view both this job and government more generally. Whether it's state government or local government, we are in the service delivery business. That means providing great public schools to people, clean roads, clean streets that are well plowed, safe neighborhoods. That is the number one thing that we need to be focused on, both at the state and local level. I saw that firsthand when I worked in City Hall. People that wanted to start a business, but they weren't able to because they had so much trouble getting a sign permit approved because the city was taking forever. That's the sort of thing we need to take more of a service delivery mindset on and make sure that we are doing our very best to meet our constituents where they are. So that is something that I think is true whether you're a teacher, you're a firefighter, you're someone working in one of the departments, or if you're an elected official. So I'm going to be bringing that sort of customer service mindset to this job. And I think that means, if it means taking 100% of my time to focus on being a state representative, that's what I'll do. It is a part-time legislature. I teach legal ethics at Northwestern. I like practicing law. If I could continue to do that as I was able to, I'd consider it. But for me, number one is bringing that mindset into the job. What do we do to make the office more accessible to people in the district? One thing I've noticed is folks in government love scheduling meetings right in the middle of the workday or at 3 p.m. or maybe 5 p.m. Well, that's really tough for folks that have a job or they have childcare responsibilities or elder care responsibilities. And so one thing that I would love to see are remote town halls, and maybe a Zoom or in person, but outside of normal working hours. You could do it at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock after the kids are in bed. Maybe you do it over the weekend, but try and schedule at times outside of normal business hours so that folks are able to interact with their state representative and talk about what's important to them. I think to me, that's an easy thing that we could do to make sure that if you ever have feedback or questions or concerns, there's an easy opportunity to get a hold of me.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to some of these other questions. Let me ask this one. Under the big beautiful bill, the BBB, Illinois now has an obligation to either opt in or opt out of a federal law that would allow people to claim a federal tax credit to send their kids to any school, private, religious, in addition to public, federal tax credit. Should Illinois opt in to that federal law? Karine, you first.
I am absolutely against taking any money away from public schools. Private schools do not hold students to the same standards. They don't have the same discrimination regulations. They don't give the same access to kids with disabilities. We need to invest in our public schools, and if you can afford a private school, you're welcome to do that, but I'm not willing to take any tax dollars away from funding our public schools, period.
I mean, keep in mind, if we turn it down, we don't get any of the federal dollars. You understand that, right? We don't get any of it, it's federal money.
I guess we are on the same page here. So I'm an advocate, I'm an ardent advocate of public school. My top campaign priority is investing in public schools and getting a good funding for public school. So answer is definitely no. Every tax dollar should be invested in public services. That is public education. I cannot support our taxpayer dollars to go towards profit making of certain institutions. So definitely I will not support an opt-in for voucher system kind of a system. So what I will focus on is fix our public school education funding. Shift our public school funding towards a state. Let the state take the major share of public school funding, and we can hold them responsible for metrics like career readiness, early education, attendance, and so on. So that's my stand on this.
I agree with these two. I would not support the voucher program. And I will say, I think it is critically important we provide a great education for every kid in this state. More than 90% of students in Illinois attend a public school. So our focus needs to be on making sure for the vast majority of our kids that we are doing the very best that we can to provide great public schools all across this state. And for me, that means being very focused on promoting student achievement. I started my career as a 4th grade teacher, went in, worked as hard as I could every single day to try and make sure that my kids had every advantage that they could in terms of reading, histories, social science, and everything else that they would need to succeed in middle school and then in high school. And I want to make sure that everybody in our education system from top to bottom shares that mindset. Over the past year or two, we have seen a lot of adult drama in Chicago public schools getting distracted from what I think the core mission of Chicago public schools is. And I would like to see across the system, whether it's the city or the state, that we all really recommit to the core mission of what our public schools are, providing kids a great education so that they're well equipped to be productive citizens, voters, and members of our democracy.
So I'm proud to have served on the Alcott Local School Council and then the Lincoln Park High School one. And you know, one thing I was proud of when one of our local elected officials endorsed me, she said, "You're the only one who's ever come to me advocating for something for our community." And that meant a lot because I've really fought for our schools to have the effective resources that we need in our schools. I'm always passionate about having the strongest possible neighborhood schools. There was an Illinois program called Invest in Kids that expired. I support letting that expire because I don't think we could use Illinois potential tax revenue in going to private schools. It is important, what we're talking about though, is federal money that I actually think we should not, we have some amazing schools in this neighborhood, but that's not true for everyone on the south and west sides. And I don't think we should be so quick at a time when Trump is squeezing families when he's done nothing to address costs to tell a family, actually, you cannot draw on that to go to the school that you feel most confident in for your hopes and your dreams for your child. So I actually am not against Governor Pritzker if he decides to opt in, because I think we need to really put yourself in the shoes of that family that's struggling. My focus as a state representative is making excellent schools in every neighborhood, so everyone feels confident in their neighborhood school. There's been a lot of drama in this leadership of CPS that makes people not feel that way. I focus on strategies like early education, early literacy, social behavioral emotional health, special education, career and technical education, dual enrollment for early college. So I'm really focused on using our Illinois resources on driving outcomes to make our school system the best in the country, and that's ultimately my priority as a state representative.
Okay, there were quite a few questions about the graduated income tax. I think some of you have already talked about it. Here's my question. Do you support a graduated income tax? And if you do, it just lost by vote. People voted against it. Is it time to try again? Timing is important in politics. Is it time to try again? And if so, what would be different this time? What would help pass it this time? Or what would in fact pass it this time that didn't happen last time? So who's next? Lindsay, I think you're next.
I think it's
First up.
Hi. Having worked with multiple nonprofits on legislative advocacy in Springfield many times, one thing I know is nothing comes easy. Nothing gets passed the first time. So I do feel we need to try again because graduated income tax is a very fair system that will bring more revenues to our state. And it's a very fair system where anybody within their capability based on the income can pay a certain percentage towards our state. So I think it's a very fair system that can expand our revenue base in our state. So definitely we need more education and more conversation about it. We need to have a much more advocacy around graduated income tax, with different stakeholders, different populations, and we need to do a much more active advocacy to get the buy-in from the larger population in Illinois. But definitely compared to other income tax ideas, I certainly think graduated income tax is the most fairer and egalitarian kind of system.
I agree with Litzy that I think a graduated income tax does make sense, but I do have a little bit of disagreement maybe about why it failed. So I don't think it was just a persuasion problem. When I knock doors and talk with voters, I hear pretty frequently concerns about whether or not our state is being a responsible steward of tax dollars. And so, like Litzy had mentioned earlier, we have a lot of duplicative school districts here in Illinois. And we're in fact nearly first in the nation on administrative and overhead costs on a per pupil basis in our public schools. So I think before we go to voters again and say, hey, we want to raise billions of new dollars in revenue, again, which I would support doing, I think we need to have that in the context of a discussion where we're showing voters that as a state, we are being responsible stewards of tax dollars. If we brought our per pupil spending on these administrative and oversight costs down just to the national average, we're not knocking the skin off the ball, but we're doing a reasonable job at it, we'd save over $1 billion a year across the state. We can invest that into classrooms. We can invest that into things that actually drive student achievement. And I think with a couple things like that, showing voters that we are committed not just to raising revenues, but also to being, again, responsible managers of tax dollars, I think that would go a long way to establishing some of the trust that we need before we go back to voters and ask for an increase in revenue. So while I support the graduated income tax, I'd like to see that in the context of a broader approach where we're showing everyone that we're doing everything we can to manage our tax dollars as reasonably as we can.
Yeah. A lot of Democratic friends I was surprised by, voted against it, and it really was to do with that trust of how Illinois government was going to spend. So I think we need to have a deal on the future of pensions that would have to accompany that, because I think people are going to need to feel that ultimately, if they're being, that to make that bridge through that trust, that their money is just not going into, endless spending. And, some of the things that I've talked about that I think can be part of that, a more aggressive buyout program. If you actually offer a lot of pensioners 65% of the total cost, a lot of them will take it for immediate use, and that's huge for us to get that off the book. We can look at future ones. What are the healthcare contributions? Right now, public employees ask for 16%, and the private market is 42%. So I think that needs to look a little different in the future. Looking at 401k type programs, and not making things worse ultimately. I think ultimately we have to be able to say to voters, okay, we have a fiscal future, we have a roadmap here. We're going to bring down some of these structural costs that are eating into the budgets from a fifth of the budget, so it'd be a fourth of the budget. And if we have a road plan that allows folks to feel like, oh, okay, my pension is secure because we figured out a path for how we're going to be able to pay this stuff. I think it helps all of us feel, hey, we can ask some for more because, yeah, we have real needs. Look at our high school, we have, ceiling is falling down in some parts. It's amazing school, there's amazing stuff going on, but we really do need revenue. So I guess we got to earn that trust, and that starts with pensions. We have to be able to make a deal for our future there.
You know where I stand on this because I've talked about it a lot tonight. But I truly believe we need a tax code that reflects our values, and those who benefit most from our economy should pay more so that we can fund schools, so that we can fund essential services here in the city and in the state. The reason it failed is because billionaires spent over $100 million in a campaign against it. And I'm talking about Ken Griffin here, who, again, said he was going to leave if it passed. It didn't pass, and he still left. And I still hear this argument that we're scaring away billionaires. Chicago is a world-class city. This is an amazing, amazing place to live. And we're not scaring people away by asking those who benefit the most to pay a little bit more for our services. I'm not talking about people who are making $100,000. I'm talking about people who are making $100 million. They can pay a little bit more to make sure that we don't have to cut education, that we don't have to cut essential health care for vulnerable communities.
A lot of follow-up questions, but I'm not allowed to do that. Okay, here's another question that someone asked. Chicago is not the only city in Illinois. What are some of the particular challenges that we face because of that? So who's back? Is this your, are you first up?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. And I do think it's important to think about, what we do as a state to manage, not just for Chicago, but, the state as a whole. One thing that I think is very significant that we need to think about is driving economic opportunity, not just in Chicago, but across our state as a whole. You know, there's a lot of places outside of Chicago that don't have the same access to economic opportunity or the job market that we have in Chicago. And there's a lot of things that we can be doing at the state level to promote economic growth all across this state. So one thing that I learned recently, which I was shocked to hear, is that Rockford, which you all know is not too far from Chicago, there's no daily rail service that connects Rockford to Chicago. And to me, that's very surprising because that is a no-brainer. You'd imagine that Metro would be able to connect those and you'd be able to go to and from on a daily basis there. Governor Pritzker has driven investments to actually reopen that route. And I think those are exactly the sort of investments that we need that I was talking about earlier when we think about economic growth. That means when you have that sort of daily rail service, which is exactly the sort of thing that the state should be focusing on, folks in Rockford have an easier access to all the economic opportunities that we have here in Chicago. And on the other hand, people in Chicago that are maybe sick of paying our property taxes or our high housing costs can move out to Rockford and consider commuting as they're able to. But this is the sort of thing, these kind of investments in public infrastructure, I also talked about investments in higher education. We should be focusing on those as a state to drive economic opportunity, not just in Chicago, but across our state as a whole, because that to me is the only feasible long-term solution that we're gonna have to deal with our legacy of debt and unfortunate position in terms of economic growth.
One of the ways we're unique is we're the only place paying twice on teacher pensions in Illinois. So we pay into the Chicago teacher pension that's held in Chicago, and we ultimately are paying into the Illinois one. So this is another part of the pension reform I think is important. We can move the teachers' pensions into the state one, free up $600 million we could use in education. We're talking about getting money into the classroom. That's one of the ones that we got to work on the political will to do it because it's sitting there right for getting money into supporting students. We do need a more competitive business climate. It is just I hear it over and over that one of the uncertainty that CEOs feel to be able to invest, and that it comes from again needing a fiscal roadmap in the state for our health. But ultimately we got to listen to small business owners and what they tell us. It's really hard, and it breaks your heart when we see those vacants, right, in our community. We love when a new small business opens. We go in there, we support them. It's vibrancy, it's eyes on the street for our safety. And I think when people are getting hit by a mayor saying he's going to put a head tax to disincentivize hiring, you kidding me? We need some common sense in this city. And we got to listen to those who want to add to their payroll, want to give opportunity, and be able at the state level to pass certain policies that are going to make sure that we're also going after the industries of the future. What is growing? I can't be about seizing the future. So I'm talking about advanced manufacturing, clean energy, robotics. We talked about quantum. We really have to go and listen to what it's going to take to get you here, to get you growing in Chicago, despite the current worries you might have about the current city leadership. But we want to get decisive. We want to get the workforce aligned and training. One of our assets is our people, is our universities, certainly our water. So let's work hard on how we grow, because that helps all the other problems with our revenue and all these pieces.
This district in particular is entirely in the city of Chicago. So if I'm going to be in Springfield, my priority is always going to be to you and here in this district. But I agree with Paul and Mac here. There's so much we can do to help spur economic development across the state. I've helped grow and run businesses in 6 different municipalities across the northern suburbs, the western suburbs, and Chicago. It is so hard to go through both local regulations and state regulations. At the state level, if you're opening a business, sometimes you got to go through the Secretary of State, the Illinois Department of Public Health. You got to get, if you're putting a new curb cut, you need to go through IDOT. You've got the Department of Revenue. You've got the Department of Labor. What I'm proposing is a single platform to streamline all of that. Let's make it so easy for people to come and open businesses here in the state. I think it's so essential for us to grow our tax base, to create good paying jobs. And I think we just got to make it easier for small businesses, especially, to open here.
One of the reasons One of the reasons why I decided to run for state representative office is because you have the opportunity to think about the broader needs of the whole state. When we are worried about certain issues, locally, sometimes it cannot be addressed at the local level. We need to take a broader perspective to address things. For example, and I agree, Chicago, carries Illinois. Many other cities across Illinois do feel like a stepdaughter or stepson syndrome, and that shouldn't be the case. So coming back to the priorities that I've been talking about, take public education. The disparity is so apparent across the state. A child's education is dependent on the zip code one lives because we are basing public school funding on local property taxes. In Chicago, we raise good, we pay taxes and that helps our district. But there is another school district in one of those downstate districts, they don't have that kind of funds. So the quality of education suffers. Again, public safety. We talk about public safety. I've been hearing since I came here, and it's an unaddressed issue for decades. We cannot solve it at the local level. We need to take a broader vision about it. We have violence in the prevention funding at the state level. Now, let's use that funding to create structured pathways. Like, I teach in Cook County Jail. I've been teaching in Cook County Jail for the past few years. I've seen both sides of the coin. We talk about public safety. We need to hold people accountable for sure, but it needs to be paired with structured pathways to stop reoffending. And at the state level, when you do that, we will be able to get sustainable public safety. Thank you.
So we just, Lindsay just mentioned public safety. I wanted to focus on that. One of the questions is this: the neighborhood associations have been thinking about public safety initiatives, and they have several ideas. Hopefully you've looked at those. Which of those proposals could you envision going to Springfield and championing and moving forward on? Paul, I think you're first.
Yeah, I think our neighborhood associations do such a great job of drawing out some of the different things that people want to see. Gold Coast Association Neighbors did a whole listening, focus group sessions. Phil Brown's been working hard on this for Old Town. So, I think ultimately supporting community policing and our CAPS programs are really key to have in our beat. The communication that we need. For me, I care a lot about getting creative with the recruitment of police officers. I think we need to appreciate our police officers and make this a profession where people can stay in, where it has the right R&R, where we take care of their mental health, where we show that appreciation for them. But I think it's also important that we draw in the best technologies possible. And I think that's a key thing that we can really talk about as neighbors of what are those things, because, policing is changing. There's good ideas all over the country for different ways that you can use things. I don't know if we talk about license plate readers, pod cameras, but I think it does start in that foundation of being able to bring neighbors together, safety committees, block groups, to be able to work and talk about what we're seeing and allowing that to guide the public safety that we want delivered.
When you look at crime data, it shows that homicides are down here in Chicago, but violent crimes are still a major issue. And so when my wife and I are taking our 2-year-old around to parks or on the L, public safety is constantly on our mind. And I'm sure it is for you as well. We need to tackle public safety with both accountability and prevention. And accountability is making sure that we staff policing, make sure that we train policing, make sure that we focus law enforcement efforts on repeat violent offenders. We also need consistent community policing. We need officers who know us, who know our community, who know what we need, and know also the repeat offenders that are in our community. We also, very importantly, need to get to the root causes of crime. We need to invest in education. We need to invest in mental health services. We need to invest in youth job programs. We need to invest in violence prevention programs. These things have proven to reduce crime in the long term, to give economic opportunity to people across the city, across the state. I think that's as important as the accountability measure.
One of the recommendation I read was retail theft task force, which I thought that would be a good start. We all know how, there is shoplifting in small businesses, Target, Walgreens. Walgreens manager was telling me how a couple of youth would just come inside the shop, take a whole bunch of chocolates and walk away laughing. I feel we have to hold our youth in conflict accountable. And I have gone to schools in the South Side and West Side and have worked there for 6 months. And I have seen that children in those schools are not imagining a future for them. We have to help them imagine a future. They have to be held accountable for sure for shoplifting, because if you don't, we are causing more harm, and that's not compassion actually. So what I suggest is, as a tutor who have been teaching in Cook County Jail for the past few years and having done primary research on children living in the streets, it matters. Accountability has to be paired with structured pathways, skill development, career development, education, mentoring, tracking them to make sure they're not reoffending. Now, it's not a free pass. It will be a mandated pathway, and there will be escalating consequences. When you do that, you can actually let us help our children and youth reimagine a future, irrespective of the neighborhood they come from. Otherwise, we are never going to have a sustainable public safety. What we will be doing is recycling the people through the same system. That's why we are talking about public safety for the past decades and decades without any good solution. So, retail theft task force would be a good place to start this conversation, and let's restore public safety for good.
Thank you.
So I think, we're largely in alignment, it sounds like, up here on some of the things that need to happen. I think, with respect to both the state and local government, public safety is our number one responsibility. If we're not providing that, everything else is going to be, second in priority. So there's both policing and I think non-policing interventions that we need to focus on. On the policing side, sort of like how Paul was mentioning earlier, focusing and continuing to double down on things like community policing, making sure that we have officers on beats that are familiar with our neighborhoods, familiar with the issues that they're going to face, and then also, maintaining our CAP system. And, to the extent you've got meetings and check-ins that neighbors have a place where they can go to voice their concerns about public safety. On the non-policing side, there's a number of things that we're experimenting with here in Chicago that we should continue doubling down on. So providing task forces that are geared towards responding to people suffering from mental health crisis or substance abuse crises, things that are maybe outside the ambit of a police officer's day-to-day responsibilities, we should continue to fund those as best we can. Similarly, I think promoting investments in physical infrastructure, things like lighting, making sure that our streets are well lit, our sidewalks have access to light, and where there's a dark spot, that there's funding available so that you can put a light pole up there. Those are things that are practical, easy things to do that we can help kind of move the needle on public safety. And then last, continuing to provide state support in the form of grant making for interventions for folks that are likely to be involved in violent crime. So providing job training, mental health support, and other things to interrupt the cycle of violence that unfortunately can bleed into areas all across the city, including our neighborhood.
So another safety issue is speeding and distracted drivers. Is there anything that state legislature can do to give more tools to local law enforcement in dealing with those issues?
Yeah, this is an incredibly serious issue. It feels like, honestly, since COVID, like people have forgot how to drive. I mean, I've almost gotten run over in so many intersections. People don't stop for stop signs. People, speed through small local streets. It's unacceptable. And The issue is we have laws on the books. We need to make sure that there's enough officers that are trained and staff to be able to tackle this issue and keep people accountable for it. The other thing, and I think this is separate from it, but maybe more long-term, is that we need to make sure that public transit is reliable and safe. There's a reason why people still rely on cars, and the state legislature has done a lot to invest in transit, but there's so much more we need to do. I mean, people feel like they can't rely on transit, they don't think it's safe enough for them, and so they rely on cars. If we can get people to move towards public transit, we can invest in more bike lanes, if we can make it easier for people to avoid using cars, we will have safer streets. And I think that's something that the state legislature can do more to invest in.
We are on the same page. We are on the same page here. I agree. Speeding is a problem, especially as a mother who walks their kids to school. This is something that, oh, can you not hear?
Yes. Yep.
As a public school parent, we all walk to our school. So speeding is a problem. Even when it's near the schools, we see people being very careless about sticking to their speeding limits. So definitely it's a problem that needs to be addressed at the state level. We need more education, awareness for drivers about what they're doing. And at the same time, I agree with Kareem. We really need to make our public transit appealing to our residents. We need to increase our ridership in our public transit, which will in turn increase our revenues and address a lot of problems that CTA is promising. I'm excited about the new bill, new transit bill, which should be very good. But back to speeding, I think we really need to have some accountability as well. Because right now, I found it as an immigrant, I found it a little amusing that, there will be, when I drive, there'll be some places saying that, hey, there's a camera ahead. I'm like, really? So am I supposed to just be careful about driving when I see that sign? So anyways, I'm shown the time, so I have to wrap up. So with speeding, if we nudge people towards public transit, it has a lot of benefits. Public safety, environmental benefits, increase in our revenues, and better. It will be good for all, and it will be safe for our little children, seniors who rely on walking and public paths. So we definitely need to tackle it.
Okay.
So I share the concern. I mean, I've got 2 young kids. We like to walk them over to Baller Park or Oz Park, and I find myself getting older and older and shaking my fist at the cars, blowing down Larrabee. But it is a huge concern. I will say this is probably going to be something that is going to be partially a local issue, a city issue. This is something that I think I would want to work with the alderman to propose a solution on. But, as a state legislator, I could not be going out there installing speed bumps myself. So what I could do, though, is a couple of things. One, one of the things that you do as a state legislator is fight for capital infrastructure dollars when the state does something like a capital bill. So this is obviously a concern for our district. I'm going to go out and fight as hard as I can to bring as much money back as I can for the 12th district to invest in things like traffic infrastructure to address this problem. Similarly, we in the state legislature have the power to do appropriations, setting up new grants and trying to come up with ways to deal with this problem through grant making. That could be things like investing in technology, especially along Lakeshore Drive, to try and deal with the insane speeding on what is supposed to not be a highway street. And then also, in streets near public schools or other areas where there's a bigger risk of a pedestrian getting hurt. So those are things I think as a state legislator, I'd be able to do to try and work alongside our city officials and aldermen to make sure that we have the resources we need to tackle this problem.
Yeah, as a lakefront district, speed on Lakeshore Drive is totally out of control. I see friends here that live on Belmont, Sheridan, Lakeshore know really well how people just come flying off that. I was really in Clark the other day. It's out of control. I'm honored to have my community worker in the support of Senator Sarah Feigenholz with your support, be your legislative partner in the House. And one thing we talk about is a ticketing system on Lakeshore Drive that gives people warnings. This is like behavioral science. It was found to work, I believe, in Germany. That when just people got a warning, it gave them an accountability, and speeding went considerably down. So we don't need, we don't have to, take money out of folks' pockets necessarily, but we can change behavior with that kind of technological innovation. So I think that's a great, grant program to pay for. It also raises kind of a Lakeshore issue I do want to bring up. And I'm also interested in noise ticketing. And I think those who live closest to the lake know this well. These manipulated vehicles, these three-wheel, slingshots, and some of these the muffler manipulations are just keeping people up day and night. And I'm the only person I've seen represented talk about. I think we need noise ticketing. You can do this. It will never take away from officers' time. We got to keep them focused on the most serious criminals and violent crime. But you can just use the technology, as we've done other places, to stop some of that behavior, because there's no reason for it. And I think you should be able to rest and sleep, and have a child be able to sleep, and be able to love living, near and along our lakefront.
Thank you. I think we've covered a lot of ground, and I know people are beginning to leave. If your question or topic was not addressed, please know the candidates will be in the next room. They will be at their own tables, and feel free to go up to them and have a continued conversation. So let's turn it over to you all for 2-minute closing statements. Who's first one up? Let's see.
Order, or how do you do it?
However you want to do it, I don't know.
Where did we stop that? Let's see. Why don't you go first?
Okay.
Go ahead. 2 minutes.
I am Litzy Kuchingil, running for Illinois State Rep. Neighbors, you have a very clear choice here. You have either you can choose politics as usual, broken promises, and same old excuses for the things that were not addressed. Or you have a candidate who is supported by neighbors and who will show up and who will speak the truth and who will put people at the center. I promise ethical leadership and transparency in Springfield. I am not supported by political insiders or power brokers or family wealth. I am supported by people whose daily life priorities have been unheard in Springfield. I show up. Even when things get hard, I show up. I've been going to Broadview Detention Center regularly despite getting hit by tear gas and pepper bullets to uphold immigrant rights. I go and teach in Cook County Jail so that people will have a pathway. Even when there are no cameras, I show up and I take the hard fight. I have been part of the 2 presidential campaigns, went to rural Pennsylvania and Georgia to make sure Democrats get that victory. I served as a regional organizing director of Democratic Party of Illinois, overseeing collar counties, building coalitions, and strengthening our party. I founded Illinois Democratic Women of Cook County, led Women's March and Handmaids Protest, upholding reproductive rights and bodily autonomy. And as a local school council, I organized one of the first COVID vaccination drives when there was a shortage of vaccines. Today, I am here to be your employee, accessible, prepared, and willing to challenge anything that will not put people first. Not by political insiders, not by power brokers, but people first.
Well, first off, thank you all for being here tonight. I so appreciate everyone being willing to, schlep out here on a winter evening to hear from all of us. And it sounds like, us at this table here and many of the folks in the audience are aligned on some of the key issues that we're facing in this district. We have an out of control cost of living problem in the 12th district. We have a need for public schools that are better serving our students. And we need a plan to stand up to a federal government that has been trampling on our rights and threatening us with ICE. Everyone here is aligned on these things, but I have a record of delivering on each of these issues. As an employee working in City Hall as a senior policy advisor and legal counsel, I work to streamline housing approvals, making it easier for builders to be able to get new construction started all across our city. On issues like public schools, I've taught in the classroom. I started my career as a fourth grade teacher, and since then, I've fought for investments in our public schools. And on ICE, we saw Donald Trump and his ICE and Border Patrol come in during his first administration using many of the same tactics that we see today. Mayor Lightfoot asked me to work on the law that is now on the books saying that ICE cannot use any Chicago resources and cannot get assistance from the Chicago Police Department. I've sat across the table from DHS, ICE, and Border Patrol and told them that they weren't welcome here. I have experience on these issues, and so if elected to Springfield, I'm not going to be learning how to do this job on day one. I've done many of these things before. I've drafted laws, I've assembled coalitions, and I've stood up when people didn't want to see that change happen, and I got it through. So I ask that you don't just consider what it is that we're saying, but what everyone's record is on each of these issues. And for that reason, I ask for your vote. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you again for coming in. People's records are really important. There's something that didn't come up tonight that is important if we're going to be informed voters of this election. And that is that Kareem Lakhani has been a partisan Republican who called for the Affordable Care Act to be repealed. And it's really important to be an informed voter. If you want to read his writings, his only political writings, they're at realkareemlakhani.com. And he called my boss, President Obama, a mistake, failed, opportunistic, and not capable. And I fought for years to protect the healthcare of millions of people, spent years of my life to protect pre-existing conditions. And I think, you're gonna have to be more forthright about, in all these years of the first Trump term, Lindsay, we were working to stand up, to speak out. And what's at realkareemlakhani.com that was written as an adult, long form columns, is the only political writing we have on his values. So I think you need to know your state representative's values. My life has been very consistent. I worked for President Obama. I worked for Governor Pritzker. I built our indivisible chapter to stand up for our values and to deliver a better life and a better future. And as your state representative, you need to trust in those hard fights in Springfield. You have an advocate, you have a partner. I appreciate our neighborhood so much. As a Crane's profile on this race said, I don't know why you have no previous involvement in this district before running a Democratic primary. So, I don't know if you want to run the Republican primary or the Democratic primary, but I'm proud to be a lifelong Democrat who's going to fight for you on the practical things that as neighbors, we can work together to get things done. But it's important you read realkareemlakhani.com, consider what we've done, not what people say, what we've done to build a better future.
Like a lot of people, I had different views in college, and since have learned and grown and spent my career since helping to elect Democrats and working with organized labor. And there's a reason why I have a progressive coalition of folks who are supporting me in this race. From the SEIU, from the Teamsters Local 727, from the Secretary of State, from Personal PAC, from ICER, all of these progressive organizations who know that I'm going to go to Springfield, that I'm going to fight for immigrant rights, I'm going to fight to help working people in our state. But I appreciate Paul talking so much about me. I'll continue and not talk about him. I want to end with a story about why this moment is so incredibly personal for me. I told you my parents came here undocumented in the 1970s. In 1981, my dad was detained by immigration officials. My sister, who's here today, was 3 months old. My dad was forced to leave the country. My family was separated. We rebuilt, but we spent years worried about what was going to happen to our family and everything that we built. And so when I see Trump unleash ICE on our city, target our immigrant communities, use 5-year-olds as bait, kill people in the streets, and I see the fear that immigrant communities are feeling, I know that fear. It's the fear that my family has felt for so many years. And that's why I feel so much urgency right now to tackle this issue. I've spent my career showing up for the people who work for me. That's why my employees have endorsed me. I'm going to take this same urgency, I'm going to take this same commitment and the same follow through to go to Springfield to fight for lower costs, for safer neighborhoods, to protect our fundamental rights, and to fight for you. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for your attention, for a really excellent evening. Please, let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, appreciate it.
See you guys in action. Good luck. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you, Phil, for coordinating it.